Hey guys, today we are going to build the HackFab Mini Late Model conversion v2.2 for the Losi Mini-T or Mini-B. The process is the same for either donor car. The main difference between the B or T will be the rear shock position on the tower and arms. So I'm going to show you real quick. Like, this is what we're going to end up with. This is my personal open late model. This is used, so don't mind the carpet fuzz, but generally this is like not a quite full option car, but it has a bunch of other upgrades that we will get into later. For today we are going to build the base late model kit. That's going to be this conversion here, and then this we're using a Mini-T ready to run brushed donor car. We've already taken the electronics out. So we're going to start with the bare roller, and then what you're going to need is some tools. We have our little mini tool kit available that has most of what you need. Aside from that, you will need a 1/16 standard hex driver. A body reamer would be helpful, and then if you want to do anything with the lock nuts on the shock towers, our little mini thumb nut driver is also helpful. And then you will also need a 1/4 inch drive socket or nut driver. For that, we're just going to use the handle for our larger multi-tool set. So this is our HackFab Mini toolkit. Comes with a 5.5mm nut driver, 4mm nut driver, 1.5mm hex, and 1.3mm hex. Now you won't be using the 1.3 on this particular build. We came out with this a while back. When there were supply chain issues, we had a bunch of the smaller M2 screws come with M1.3 hex drive. It's still a handy tool to have on some of the other mini crawlers and some other things that have that. So for these purposes, we'll probably be using mostly the 1.5 and the 5.5. So you put your rest of the tools away. We're going to start with taking the wheels and tires off this guy just to make things a little bit easier. So I've taken the tires off, and this is what we've got for a Mini-T roller. The tools you're going to need mostly are going to be the 5.5mm nut driver, take the wheels off, and then a 1.5mm hex driver. It does most of the screws on this kit. There's going to be some extra ones in our HackFab kit that are a little bit different. Like I said, you'll need a 1/16 hex driver, but basically what you've got here is your donor car, and you can use a Mini-B or a Mini-T, and the process is going to be the same essentially. The main difference is going to be that the Mini-T has the shocks on the rear of the arms and the tower, and a Mini-B has them on the front of the arms and the tower. They use a different rear tower between them, but for our purposes they mount the same to the chassis, so you should be good with either donor car. It's just personal preference. If you want to start with a pro roller or a a brushed car that you already have, either one will be fine. So now that we have our donor car prepped, stripped of all electronics and tires, we're going to get into our kit here. Show you kind of how it all goes together. You'll open it and there'll basically be a few different bags. And mind you, the EDM kit goes together the same way. The only difference is it won't come with this bumper package. It'll come with a TPU 3D printed nose bumper mount for the GT Bodies EDM body. It's also a good donor car for the Midwest mod. You need a separate bumper for that. But today we'll show you the late model. So what you're going to get is chassis plate. You'll get the bumper kit, and then in here there are a couple other bags, and it's all kind of sorted out. So we've got our battery brackets. We've got the rear bumper mount or body mount. We've got a set of body posts. We've got our few HackFab stickers. Put those on the body later. We have a Velcro strap. We have two spacers, a transmission spacer, chassis spacer, kick wedge, and then some hardware. And then the hardware is kind of separated, so like these are the screws for the bumper, they're with the bumper bag, and these are the screws for the rear body mount, they're with that bag. So we'll have these screws here are for the main kit, so we'll start with those. We'll put the front and rear end stuff aside for a minute, and then it's good to always kind of organize your build, put everything where you can easily get to it. And so we'll start with this chassis plate being the main thing. So here we've unpackaged the chassis plate and the main screws for the kit that were in the bottom of the main bag. So you've got the carbon plate and those screws, and a little instruction card. So like this goes to our old site, so if you go to HackFab RC/instructions or scan this QR code, you'll see the basic diagram that helps you see how everything is stacked in the kit when you put this together. It's not really a comprehensive set of instructions step by step, but like I said, you'll see in this video, it's actually not as bad as it seems. So just keep that in mind. If you need to reference that, just go to the instructions page and look for that the diagram, and that'll really help you out. So basically we're going to take this donor car and we're going to take the front and the rear clip off. You can probably start with removing this really long screw for this battery hold down on the T. You won't have to do this with the B because they use the rubber O-ring to hold the battery down, then you don't end up reusing any of that. But for this thing, you're not going to need this this hold down, so you can just get that out of the way. You're not going to need that screw either. So we're basically going to remove the bumper to get it off the chassis. So then you'll come to the lower bulkhead here. And you can remove those screws. And then you've got that kind of free, so then you'll end up removing these bulkhead screws. So with that, you basically have your entire front clip is off. It's just connected to the servo, which you can pop right off. So then here is your front clip to your car, essentially. I usually do this in stages. So what we can do is immediately just take the front end from the car and put it right onto the conversion, and then we'll tackle the rear afterwards. So this here is a chassis spacer, we call it. So basically it replaces the same thickness and shape of the chassis. So that is a keyed design that goes onto this main front part. Fit is nice and tight, so it should snap right on, if you can see that. So that, like I said, that basically replaces the chassis. And then you take your kick wedge to this piece, and then that goes like this with the that lip facing the back. It just goes in there, and then we take, of your pile of screws, there are only 2 of these M2 by 14 cap heads, and you can put those right into the stack. So what this does is it goes up through the block, up through the chassis spacer, and then into those nuts that are on that camber block up there. Or if you have the aluminum version of that, then that's just threaded and there's no nuts. So that's really all you need to do there. So then this is essentially ready to mount to our chassis, which then you just use the most of these screws. There's 2 M2 by 10s countersunk, or sorry, there's 4 of those, and then there are a bunch of M2 by 6s. So you're going to use the shorter stainless screws. They come with the kit, and those go right into the kick wedge, like so. So that bolts up just like that. And then we're gonna do, we won't need this 4 original screws that we took out. We will end up using these spacers here. These are going to go underneath those supports like that. And then we will use the M2 by 10 screws for those. So that'll mount through the spacer and into those other pieces. And do the other side real quick. Everything lines up. And there you have it. Basically your front end is on the new chassis plate. We can go ahead and mount take our servo. You can use the stock servo, comes in your kit. It lasts a while. Generally, I see most guys replacing the Spectrums with an Eco Power or a Savox, or on our, most of our team guys have switched to like a 12th scale servo, in which case we have our 12th scale servo mounts available. They don't come in the kit, and then you need to provide your own 12th scale servo, obviously. but I'll just show you real quick while we're into that. So this is a 12 scale servo. It's commonly used. It's a Savox SV1257. The 1250 or the Futaba 9650, I believe, are also about the same case size. So you can basically get our servo mount here, and then you can mount this much bigger, more reliable servo. The caveat is that you do also need a different horn. We run a straight horn off there. Hot Racing makes this one, and then their EcoPower just released their own. Both of those are for the Traxxas Mini E-Revo of all things, but it works well, clears the chassis, and it puts the bell crank link at the right kind of offset from the servo. So just a little side note, but if you're using your stock servo, you can just mount this up. I'm not going to connect this later, but you need a set of needle nose pliers. But basically you reuse the screws from the original servo mounting screws, and we'll use the back holes on the chassis to line this up. So there are two sets of holes, and that is because there were some people using like Savox or Reef's 99 servo originally that they weren't using a saver for, so therefore you're running a straight horn off of it, which means you needed to move the servo about 7 millimeters forward. And so like this is the current stock spacing, just like on the stock chassis for that. So there is another option if you want to run a servo with a straight down horn like that 12 scale, because like the stock servo saver moves that ball way forward. So if you don't have that and go straight down, you can move your servo forward with the holes that are already in the chassis. So now I've got our complete front end mounted. We won't need that bumper or that screw. So we'll do the rear next. All right, so now you're going to take the rear of your chassis and do the same thing. We will be taking this off of here and mounting it onto there. There's no wedge or anything else to put in there except for this little transmission spacer, and we'll get to that in a minute. But basically you're going to remove these 6 screws, the 2 for the waterfall and the 4 for the transmission, and you will be reusing those. So make sure you don't lose them. Get rid of the 2 waterfall screws first, and then kind of got to be careful when you take this apart. It does tend to explode in your hands, all the different pieces that are holding the rear end together. For as many as we've done, it still happens. It's just a lot of pieces held together with 4 screws essentially. So just take your time, be careful. I tend to get 3 of them all the way out, and then slowly do that other one while preparing to get the other chassis to set right on top of it. And I'll kind of pinch this suspension together so that hopefully it doesn't move. To get your chassis off, as I was talking about. So you're gonna try to hold all of this moving suspension part stuff together. And then you take your chassis, flip it over like this. So you're gonna get that started, we'll rotate it, push it down. Now this is if you're doing like a base quick conversion. Generally, what most of our racers are doing is they're doing a bunch of transmission work at the same time. The B and the T usually come with a ton of black grease in the transmission. So we have been freeing that up like you would a mud bus, cleaning that out, and doing all that sorts of stuff. So this would be a really good time to do that. At the same time, save you a little trouble later. But for our purposes, we're just going to show you quick how this kind of goes together. So there is your rear. So we have this little transmission spacer that just goes underneath and in. And what that does is it takes up that small, about 2 millimeter kick-up lip that they have in the stock chassis here, and it keeps the transmission flat. So what you're going to do is have that screw basically go up through the transmission spacer and the arm retainer and into the transmission. Some guys like to use a little bit longer screw here. We've run tons of laps with the stock screws. If you tighten them a little too much, you can strip that out, but a longer screw is helpful if you want. It will end up going up further into this, and there is enough thread and space in there, so you've got plenty of room to do so. They're just not included, and like I said, we're going to reuse these waterfall screws from before, and then we'll have all 6 of those screws installed. And we'll have a rear end that's basically ready to go. So now you have like your base mini late model roller. So the next thing we're going to do is install the body mounts and bumpers. And we'll go over that next. So the next thing we'll want to do is we'll take our chassis, set to the side for a minute, and then we'll do some body post work. So these body posts are made for 440 screws, which is atypical in the mini market. Is very common in the on-road and other markets. So we're using these posts, and just so you have an idea, the tolerances are pretty tight, so we usually try to open up the end of the post a little bit with a body reamer, or you could like hold a pair of Lexan curved scissors sideways, or just use a hobby knife and be careful. But opening that screw hole is going to make your life a lot easier later. And it's just the end. We don't make the entire hole bigger, so it's just kind of like to get the screw started. That's going to be super helpful. So we'll put that aside. So I guess we'll start with the front bumper. So you get, I've already taken the bumper and hardware out of the bag. So what you'll have here is a carbon fiber front bumper. There are guys, we also offer a Kydex bumper. Some people prefer that. If you're prone to hitting the wall a lot, it does help give some impact resistance, a little bit of give. So basically these blue screws are aluminum, and like I said, they are 440, mainly because there are some instances where you would mount a body right off of this nose of the chassis, or through these post areas here. But that's what we end up using to mount the bumper, just because some people might use a post there. So what we'll do is put the nut on the other side, tighten this up. Like I said, this is standard hardware, so it's a little different than your rest of the kit. I usually like to start both of these. using the 1/16 hex driver and basically 1/4 inch nut driver on the other side. Tighten that up real quick. And then you've got your bumper mounted. So, and depending on where you want to mount your body, there are 3 different hole configurations. You've got these one towards the back of the car, you've got one towards the front, and then you've got a wider one. I typically use these ones on my car, but there are a lot of folks using the other configuration. It all depends on which body you're using and how far forward you want the body post. So I always recommend doing like a dry mount with your clear body to see kind of where the post should line up before you put your posts on. So I'll wait to install those, but we're going to use these button heads for the shorter posts in a little bit, and then we'll move forward to mounting the rear bumper. So this is going to go this same exact way. We're going to take our hardware out. Comes with similar hardware, 2 blue screws, 2 blue nuts, and in this case we are using countersunk screws to mount the body posts. So this is going to go countersink side down, and then this is just going to bolt here the exact same way that the front bumper mounted. Start that. So we'll get that started. And tighten up like the last set. If you don't have a 1/4 millimeter or a 1/4 inch nut driver, you could always just use a pair of needle nose pliers, although that does tend to mar the nut. But that's our rear body mount. It also is a rear bumper mount. If you buy the rear bumper kit, you will end up using these other 4 screw holes I'll show you on this car. So we have M2 screws that come up and all the way through, and then they mount to the front with M2 lock nuts. Those are included in the bumper kit. And then also on the back, I'll use some more 440 screws, and that's how that rear bumper mounts. So it is nice because it does protect your body post if you have another car coming in quick, especially in late models, like a giant doorstop. It'll come right under your rear of your body, and it could shear off these posts. I don't see it a lot, but it can happen. So a bumper can be handy in that instance. And then these are a TPU material, so it does give, which is nice. So like if you are going to have an impact from the rear, it does have a little give and goes right back. So it's a super nice option if the crowd that you're running with is a little rough. If not, then you save a little bit of weight by not running this. So for our purposes, we're gonna just install the body posts without worrying about that for right now. So pair of needle nose, pay attention to which direction you want your body pins to go in. Usually on the back, I am a left to right, side to side. Tighten that up, and then you have your rear body posts installed, and we have while we're doing this, might as well do front. So I'll use the same position that I normally run. Like I said, it depends on your body and how you want to mount them, but I like this position right here. But we do also offer a foam bumper that is optional. It does help the body be a little bit protected in the front impact. So that is an optional part. But it does have 6 holes in it so that you can use any of these body hole positions for this post, and you'll be able to run the foam bumper without any modifications. So then this is how we've got that. Body posts come with these retainers that you can move up and down. They're adjustable with a grub screw. I typically use body clips to hold it, just because it's a lot easier to move up and down if you're doing a quick adjustment on the track. But for now, we're not going to mount any of those. Here you can see the front bumper has all those holes in it for adjustability. And really the last thing that we have left is our battery brackets. These are aluminum, black anodized. We are going to use these M2 by 6. They are 1.5 millimeter drive. We run a variety of batteries, and it depends on your track, what guys are running. But we like the Power Hobby 2000 milliamp. Is a super nice battery, and in that case it fits basically at the widest position for the battery bracket placement. And what you want to do first is install this Velcro strap over your battery bracket. So it basically does is sits there, catches the loop, and then I usually mount it on the back one so that it comes back over, and then the Velcro strap goes backwards. So we'll start with that one, and then like I said, we usually run the Power Hobby pack, so that we'll be all set up for it. So what you want to do is make sure you don't pinch the strap, and you let it sit in between where it's got the gap. And then it's just those 2 screws. Hold it in place. Like that. And then you can either run this one underneath now or fish it down through later. But we'll do the same thing. Not the front one. We'll finish mounting this last screw, and then we've got our basically sliding late model chassis. So that's basically all you need to do to convert your Mini-T or Mini-B to a late model. Then you pick out the body of your choice. We typically run either the late model or EDM, but late model seems to be more popular. The McAllister, Batesville, and Greenville are both great options. So that is your late model. And like so, here is the body that I typically run. This is a Greenville, so that would basically bolt right up to this using the same holes I normally do. So here you've got super fast looking oval car, And then you can trim the back posts down if you, depending on how high you want those. Typically I run mine so that there's about four open spots on the post, and then like either the top one or two on the front. So ride height's usually about there. We do run shock limiters, so if you're doing a lot of work on this car all at once to get a car ready for the racetrack, I'll go through a couple additional tips for you. So one thing we do is we run our Mini-T, Mini-B shock limiters. So like you can get this kit from us that has a bunch of different, this is used so it does not have every one of them in there, but it has a bunch of different length limiters. They go inside the shock, underneath the piston, so you gotta take the shock apart. These are bottom loading shocks. So if you take the shock off, you take this bottom cartridge out, and then you can pop little E-clips off of the shock shaft, get the piston off, and then put the limiters on when you are building the shock before you put it all back together. We typically run anywhere from 4 to 5 millimeter in the front, and 7 to 8 or 9 millimeters in the back as a starting point, depending on how much suspension travel you want. The carpet setup, we typically lower the car a lot more, so we would have more limiter sizes in there. So like I said, it's probably like a 5 and 8, and if you're on dirt, maybe a little bit less, maybe like a 3 or 4 in the front, and like a 5 or 6 in the back. But typically we limit the back a little bit more than the front. And some guys will switch limiters from left to right. I typically run the same limiter size in the front, like 5 and 5 and 8 and 8. But it's all personal preference. At some point we'll put up a base setup sheet. But like I said, for general purposes, about 5 and 8 for carpet is where we start, and a little bit less if you're gonna run dirt. Couple other things I want to go through real quick, just pro tip type stuff. This motor plate, depending on if you're on a B or a T, they are different. They have fixed settings for pinion gear sizes, so that is typically the first thing people change out. Losi makes a plate that has an adjustable slots, as does Hot Racing. The Hot Racing one is really good, and it is a little bit cheaper than the Losi one, so personal preference there. I typically run the Hot Racing one, so that gives you some adjustment. It's like 12 or 13 bucks. We've already gone over the servo options. One of the base setup things you'll want to probably change is get some heavier springs. Losi and Hot Racing both sell spring kits that you can that have some different adjustments in there, but generally an oval will want like a really heavy right front spring, so like you can run like the copper or Losi TLR came out with the 3.8 pound spring, but it's short, so it's like, you know, it's like a B. So the T springs and the B springs on the front are different sizes, but it's essentially the same shock. If you get the B springs, we do make a collar that's 3D printed for the 3.8 pound spring that would basically put the tension right about there, or it's about the height of that spring, so it allows some like full length shock adjustment, whereas you would be very far down on your shock collar to even put any pressure on that 3.8 pound spring. So those are an option part that we have. We also have brass battery brackets if you don't want to run the aluminum, or you want to move some weight around, or you want to put more left weight on, you can do that. We have a couple Nerf bar options if you want to run a Nerf bar on the right hand side. We have a short one and a wide one that goes out, so depending on if you want to keep cars, you know, out of your fender area, if there's a lot of beating and banging on the track, you can run one of those. There is the rear bumper we've already mentioned. We do make carbon fiber shock towers. You can run the B or the T on either car. The T one, we have a wide option that it has more adjustments, so you can run the shock out wider. And then the rear, we have wide towers for the B and the T. The T one probably has the most adjustment as far as width goes, and but that has an aluminum base to it. It's carbon and aluminum, and the aluminum base for the T makes it so that your shocks face the rear, and then we have a different base for the B that would mount so that the shocks face the front. So like I said, the chassis conversion works with either the B or the T, and it just depends on which car you're converting over, but they essentially handle the same at the end. There might be a little bit different handling characteristics with front mounted shocks versus rear. That is a debate for another time. But this is basically what you end up with for a base late model. So if you have any questions, let us know. We'll be more than happy to show you anything else that you want for tips. There is an older video on YouTube that we posted a while back that is our original conversion for the V2, I believe. The main difference is we tried to make everything backwards compatible. So the main differences with the original V2 is there was more battery adjustment. The battery adjustment was more towards the rear, and instead these are more spread out. So this has a little bit more adjustability because people are running a variety of different packs. Some will run the hard case stock, like 650 or 810 milliamp hour LiPo battery, which is like 2/3 the size of the Power Hobby one that we like to use. There's also a Gens Ace, a couple other ones that might be a little bit different in size. And then we added some like extra chassis space here and here. I tend to mount a little bit of like aluminum weights here, help keep that left rear down, and I typically mount my transponder up here. We do offer a brass rear hub that you can use on the left rear. That would also help keep that down. So that depends on which track you run at and what kind of the surface is, and if you really need help keeping that left rear planted, that's a good option. But yeah, so that is our late model. Oh, and the other version, the original V2, that's probably the biggest difference, is the rear body post came off of the rear tower, and that made us so, because the towers are different between the Mini B and the Mini-T, they went through these two holes, and Losi decided to make that spacing different. So we ended up having to do a B version and a T version for the rear body mount, which was like a 3D printed piece, and then we had a carbon fiber extension that went beyond that. This body mount puts these posts at the same location as they were on the old car, and if you have an old car, if you have a v2.1 which has this rear winglet, then you can just get this rear body mount kit and convert your car over to this and get away from the rear shock tower mounted rear body post. So we found that this is generally a lot better. You're not going to break the 3D printed part, and it does help keep weight down low. So that's just been an upgrade from previous versions, and it makes the chassis a whole lot cleaner. So but that's what we end up with, and you'll be ready to mount your electronics and put your battery in and go racing.